The key here is writing the same book and being on the same page. Being on the same page is about the now.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're writing different books, our future's in trouble.
And that's an amazing conversation to where you can start and then let that creativity that both of you might have, given your different time perspectives, to really try to find what is the best win-win-win when it comes to your future. Because both of you are going to be in it. And if you two want to have the best, most fulfilled, aligned future together, that requires both of you kind of sharing what your natural state is. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals from all over the world, welcome back to the one and only Conscious Couples podcast. Today we have episode number 94. How often are you and your partner discussing the future? The future. Before we jump into this episode, as always, thank you so much to Next Level Podcast Solutions for producing this show and 55 others at this stage. If you are out there and you want to start your own podcast and start your own community and start building a train that can build other people's bigger, better, brighter futures, Next Level Podcast Solutions is the way. Sweetheart, as always, before we jump into this episode, I always like to ask your intention.
My intention for our listeners is to get a little bit of a different flav with this episode. And in particular, what we're going to be discussing today is what you and I have found to be one of the special secret sauces that can really drive relationships apart or together. And my intention is for our listeners to help them understand where they're at within that when it comes to discussing their future with their partners.
So let's imagine Emilia and I cooked a pizza and you were like, oh my God, this is the best pizza that I've ever had in my entire life. And you said, how did you do this? How is this possible? I love pizza. And, you know, you guys' pizza is 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, we have secret sauce.
We got the secret sauce.
We have the secret sauce. Emilia and I have a magnificent relationship. I am often scared to say that because it is beyond my wildest dreams and I'm afraid everyone's going to think I'm arrogant. When in reality, it's just beyond what I ever thought was possible. And our secret sauce really, the crux, the cheat code, the secret sauce of our relationship is we are constantly contemplating and talking about how to have a bigger, better, and brighter future together.
Together.
We use together, not together. So together.
Together.
We were on the phone with two clients yesterday. So today is Sunday. Yesterday was Saturday, service Saturday. And these two clients are just absolutely flourishing. These are our longest ever having had clients. And we actually told them that yesterday. They're like, really? Awesome. Woo. You know, and so we sent them an award and no, we didn't. But at the end of the day, we said, yeah. And honestly, you two are flourishing. You're engaged now. You're building a bigger, better, brighter future every single other week. They're bi-weekly coaching clients. And we had this sort of breakthrough of the female in the relationship had student loans. And she set an intention prior to the call of, listen, I want to figure out how to repay these and the extent that we want to because we want to buy a house at this time. We're getting married. We have finances. How do we get on the same page about my student loan repayment? And Emilia and I on the call with this couple had this realization of this couple is constantly now, every other week, checking in on their future together. Mm-hmm. They're constantly strategizing and thinking about the future. And Emilia and I are doing that as well. And so whether it's about buying our next home, we're already planning on the end of 2024, having enough money for a down payment on the next home. And what we've come to realize in both of our coaching, both individually and collectively, is that couples are not necessarily talking about the future as much as they could or should. And we wanted to check in on that today with our listeners.
Yeah. And one of the biggest reasons why is because oftentimes we don't have this word that I'm going to introduce in the context of this episode introduced to us until now. Time perspective. So time perspective is
That's two words, love.
2 words. I just realized that. 2 words that Alan and I have really come to understand is the concept to where one person either has a longer time perspective or someone has a shorter time perspective. So what does that actually look like? What is time perspective and why does that matter for this episode?
Analogy time, real quick.
Analogy time. Let's do it.
If you've ever played chess, it's the number of moves you can think ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So a beginner thinks 3 moves ahead. A novice thinks 5 moves ahead. An expert thinks 7 moves ahead, or no, amateur, then expert, 9 moves ahead. Master is, I think, 11 to 12, and then grandmaster is 15 plus. And so a grandmaster chess player can beat like 10 masters without barely even looking at the board and going. And if you've ever looked this up, you can look it up on YouTube and you can watch these matches. It's insane. But time perspective, that's a good analogy of how many moves ahead are you thinking?
Yeah.
Some people don't think that many moves ahead. That's just the way of it. And some people do think 10, 12, 15 moves ahead. Emilia is definitely one of those people.
Yeah. Very few of us are naturally inclined to think 12, 16 plus moves ahead. In other words, from a time perspective, beyond the day-to-day, beyond the week-to-week, beyond the month-to-month, even beyond this year, right? And what I found is that through understanding people at a deeper level, and I'm sure you can attest to this as well, babe, when we are younger and we are kind of introduced into the school systems and when we're introduced in particular to athletics, when we become a team, whether maybe someone hadn't played chess, but maybe you did play soccer or you swam or you did something competitively. In that scenario, you were essentially introduced into an echo chamber where your coach had a longer time perspective than you at the time as an athlete or as a player, as a teammate did. And so, of course, when your coach has a goal to win the game or beat the other component and they encourage and introduce that into you as a player, you end up learning how to go about doing that if you're curious enough. Otherwise, you just kind of stay on the field and you try to give as much or as best as you can. And that's the analogy that I want to bring forward in addition to your chest analogy there, because it's very similar in terms of a relationship. One person might actually have a longer time perspective. So they might have a goal, an aspiration, something in their future that they're working towards. And the other partner might not necessarily have that. They actually might have a short-term time perspective because who knows, maybe that's what they grew up in, right? Maybe all they learned was just be in the day-to-day, just be in the moment and only look as far as your toes go, right? Not necessarily projecting out into the future, not necessarily looking at what is the end goal here and trying to develop the skill set that truly is at hand when it comes to discussing the future with your partner, which is reverse engineering what you two want together, a co-collaboration effort at what do we want in the future? Because right here, right now, that's what we have all the time. But if we kind of can take that metacognition and zoom out a little bit, what do we want in a year? What do we want in 2 weeks? What do we want even next Thanksgiving? And that's an amazing conversation to where you can start and then let that creativity that both of you might have given your different time perspectives to really try to find what is the best win-win-win when it comes to your future. Because both of you are going to be in it. And if you two want to have the best, most fulfilled, aligned future together, that requires both of you kind of sharing what your natural state is, what you want, what you desire, and what your time perspective oftentimes dictates that.
So in past relationships for me, I always had the longer time perspective. This is the first time I've ever not had the longest time perspective. You are thinking way, 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 way beyond. Now, this also goes based on category. Mm-hmm. So in fitness, I had a longer time perspective. In family, you had a longer time perspective. And so I know some people that have a longer time perspective on retirement funds.
Yeah.
And some people who have a longer time perspective on kids and marriage and family and what that all looks like. It all depends on your vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a big, bright vision for your family, but not a big, bright vision for your career, you probably have a longer time perspective in family than your partner. But your partner, if they have a big, bright vision for their career, it's most likely the opposite.
Right.
Hey everyone, this is Alicia. I wanted to take a second and give a shout out to Alan and Emilia. I've been listening to the Next Level University podcast for a while now, and I've also joined in on group coaching and book club, and I've gained so much value from these. And recently, I have started listening to the Conscious Couple podcast, and then joined in on their monthly meetups with relationship talks. And from here, my wife and I decided to jump on a call with them, and we had a few questions. This has just been a great experience. They not only provided us with some great tips and things to implement, they also got back with us and to check and see how we were doing. And that has just meant so much to my wife and I. And I just really wanted to give a shout out and thank them so much. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast or join in on the relationship talks, I highly recommend that. And also just jump on a call with them and get to know them a little bit better and just really lean into this resource. It's just been so valuable, and I really appreciate it.
We coach another couple, keep it anonymous always, unless we get permission explicitly in advance to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And one of the partners is a very short time perspective. And that happens to be the female in the relationship in this case. She has a long time perspective when it comes to family and how she wants her day-to-day life to be. But he has a higher time perspective with career and goals and goal orientation. And she had never really learned how to set goals. So we're kind of starting with her of this is how you set goals. Now you two can integrate. The key here is writing the same book and being on the same page. Being on the same page is about the now. But if we're writing different books, our future's in trouble. So Emilia and I right now on this episode discussed what we wanted to talk about before this episode. That's being on the same page, getting on the same page. You've heard that before. But are we writing the same book? What if Emilia wants to have the Conscious Couples podcast be completely different than what I want it to be? That's going to create unconscious conflict, and eventually we're going to grow apart in the context of conscious couples. Unless we reconnect and talk explicitly of what's your vision, what's my vision, and then integrate visions. Right. And hopefully, and this is the goal always with the Conscious Couples podcast, is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Meaning you are better together than you are apart. Some couples, that's not the case. Get out now. I'm joking. But also seriously, sometimes. And in most couples, though, I think that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts if you can integrate time perspectives. So, last piece here, I wanted to give this. When you think of time perspective, you think of timelines. I have this awesome slide that I created that I'm always using because I'm talking time perspective all the time in my coaching. That's why I always talk about my age, by the way. So I'm 35, she's 29. I'm always thinking age because I think in chronological time, compound effect, time perspective. So here's what I want to give everyone. You have seconds, and if you are not driving, I recommend writing this down. This really will blow your mind if you actually start thinking this way. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, quarters, which is 90 days, 3 months, years, and decades. This second with Emilia right now is building towards the next minute. That minute is building towards the next hour. The next hour. That hour is building towards the day. The day is building towards the week. The week is building towards the month. The month is building towards the quarter. The quarter is building towards the year. And the year is building towards decades. And decades is what forms the tapestry of your life. Now, I Google this constantly because I'm very curious about this. And the average life expectancy globally as of right now is 78. It's a little higher for women, a little lower for men. But at the end of the day, the average is about 78. Now, that is going to go up, assuming our medical breakthroughs, technology, quality of life, all that stuff. But here's my point. Do not forget, people always say, YOLO, you only live once. What if I died tomorrow? Hello? You probably won't. Based on the statistics, you most likely won't. So I always joke and I say, what if you don't? Right? I remember my buddy, he said, well, if I die tomorrow, I'll regret that I didn't eat all these Oreos today. And I said, that's got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah, now I love Oreos as well, by the way. Huge fan. But here's my point. What if you don't? Now you just got fatter, not trying to be unkind, I'm being playful. But the point is a lot of people are making short-term decisions when we're all kind of in a long-term game, most likely.
I agree. I agree so deeply. So let's conclude this episode with a couple priming questions for our listeners to really help them, per our intention, really understand where are they at in the time perspective, and also why are they discussing the future with their partner? More particular, the what. What are they talking about in their future? So number one, ask yourself, if you're listening to this, where do you fall on the time continuum of time perspective? So for example, do you tend to be more on the end of, I am just in the day-to-day. I don't really tend to, zoom out to the future much.
Do you tend to be a short-term thinker? Now remember, this is not guilt or shame. This is just self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So do you tend to think short-term
Mm-hmm.
or do you tend to think long-term?
Right. The next question I would suggest is, where in your life do you find yourself changing your time perspective based on the environment, likely social, that you're in? So say, for example, you tend to notice that, and you're going to notice a lot more after this episode, but when you go around family, maybe they're talking about the next holiday, and that's extending your time perspective a little bit more. Likewise for the person,
or shortening it.
I was just going to say, likewise for the person that's on the other end.
Like, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? I don't care.
We haven't.
Yeah. In this case, we had a plan, but
Right.
it's just I hadn't thought of that because it's not necessarily something I'm focused on, because I'm focused on 10, 20, 30,
Exactly.
40 years out.
And then the last question that I would recommend for our listeners, and babe, I want your perspective too, is what is going to be left on the table if you take into consideration what Alan, babe, you had shared around the statistics, the fact that you're more probable to be living in a long-term game.
Yeah.
Around 77 is the average between those two numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
77 years.
And honestly, by the time, if you're younger listening to this, by the time you get to that age, it will be much higher.
Right.
I mean, that's a global average too.
Right.
So if you're in a country that's very well off and wealthy, it's higher.
Right.
It's much higher.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I kind of break that down, I'll be like, okay, 7 different decades that you're building the seconds toward.
Basically 8 though, because 77 you round up. So
but
it's 8
you're
decades.
likely not listening to this podcast episode as a
0-year-old.
0-year-old.
That's
Yeah,
a fair
so I'm
assessment.
taking that into account.
Sorry,
So,
my math is very annoying.
no, it's not. It's not. So again, what are you leaving on the table by not taking into consideration that data? Meaning, what are you doing in the seconds now that are building to the minutes later, that are building to the days, that are building to the decades, that you might not be taking into consideration right now?
And then have a conversation with your partner about this and just bring up time perspective and just have a dialogue. Who has a larger time perspective and in what area? Most likely one person has a larger time perspective in career than the other.
Yep.
And most likely one person has a larger time perspective in family than the other. And that's almost always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the first step. So
Yeah.
take that first step. If you need help, Relationship Talks Coaching.
Relationship Talks Coaching for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to start to dip your toe into other things that this kind of connects to, I would say join us at our next free live virtual event. So it's going to be the 21st of December. So it's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And what we're going to be digging into is something that we know a lot of our community struggle with. So it's going to be honoring relationship boundaries during the holidays, and boundaries are always set based on the time perspective. So I won't get into the deep dive at that. That will be shared at our event, and we hope that you join us. The link will be in the show notes to register.
And if you really do want a bigger, better, brighter future with your partner, Emilia and I will help you build that with Relationship Talks Coaching. The first one is free. Give it a shot. No obligation. We're not going to sell you anything. We're just going to add value. As always, we appreciate you so much. Thank you so much. It's not about you or me. It's about the we. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is a Lazaros 88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.